You're in the right place to improve your English and hear this beautiful story. Now let's listen to the story of poor waitress Emily. Once there was a young woman named Emily who worked as a waitress in a small diner on the outskirts of town. She was a kind and hard-working person, always going above and beyond to make sure her customers were happy. But despite her friendly demeanor, Emily was struggling. She had been living on her own for a few years, ever since her parents passed away in a tragic car accident. She was barely making ends meet with her meager salary and often had to skip meals to make sure she could pay her bills on time. One day, a man walked into the diner and caught Emily's eye. He was tall and handsome, with a charming smile that lit up the room. He ordered a cup of coffee and a slice of pie, and Emily couldn't help but feel drawn to him. They struck up a conversation, and before she knew it, Emily was pouring her heart out to him. She told him about her struggles, her dreams, and her hopes for the future. The man listened intently, offering words of encouragement and support. Emily was over the moon. She had never met someone so kind and understanding before. They exchanged phone numbers, and Emily went to bed that night feeling hopeful and happy for the first time in a long while. But as the days went by, the man stopped returning her calls and texts. Emily was devastated. She had let herself believe that things were finally looking up, but now it seemed like she was back to square one. Despite the heartbreak, Emily continued to work hard at the diner, doing her best to put on a brave face for her customers. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling of loneliness and sadness that had settled in her heart. Little did she know, however, that things were about to take a turn for the worse. A few days after the man disappeared, Emily received a call from the landlord of her apartment. He informed her that he had sold the building and that the new owners wanted her to vacate the premises in a week's time. Emily was stunned. She had nowhere to go, no family to turn to, and no savings to fall back on. She begged the landlord for more time, but he was unmoved. Emily was forced to pack up her belongings and leave her home. With no other options, Emily slept in her car for a few nights, using the money she earned from her shifts to buy food and gas. But soon, she ran out of money and had no choice but to seek out a homeless shelter. As she stood in line with the other homeless people, Emily felt a sense of shame and despair wash over her. She had never imagined that her life would come to this. Days turned into weeks, and Emily struggled to make ends meet. She continued to work at the diner, but her tips were meager, and she often went hungry to make sure she could pay for a place to sleep. One day, as she was leaving the diner, Emily saw the man who had broken her heart. He was sitting outside, laughing with a group of friends, completely oblivious to the pain he had caused. Emily felt anger and hurt welling up inside her. How could he be so callous, so indifferent to her suffering? But as she turned away, she knew that she had to keep going. She had to keep fighting even when everything seemed hopeless. She didn't know what the future held, but she refused to give up. For Emily, there was always a glimmer of hope, no matter how small. Despite her best efforts, Emily's situation only seemed to get worse. The shelter she was staying at was overcrowded and often dangerous, and she had to fend off unwanted advances from some of the other residents. One day, Emily fell ill. She had been pushing herself too hard, trying to work as much as possible to save up for a new place to live. But now she could barely get out of bed. She had a high fever and was racked with coughs. Desperate for help, Emily went to the hospital. But without insurance or any means of paying for her treatment, the doctors simply gave her some medication and sent her on her way. Emily felt hopeless. She was sick, homeless, and alone. It seemed like there was no way out of her situation. But then, something unexpected happened. One of her regular customers at the diner, an elderly woman named Mary, took notice of her worsening condition. Mary had always been kind to Emily, leaving generous tips and striking up friendly conversations. But now, she took it upon herself to help Emily in any way she could. Mary paid for Emily's hospital bills and helped her find a new place to stay. She even offered to pay for Emily's rent for a few months, giving her some much-needed breathing room. Emily was overwhelmed by Mary's generosity. She had never expected to find such kindness in the world, especially not after everything she had been through. But as she settled into her new home, Emily couldn't shake the sadness and despair that had settled in her heart. She was grateful for Mary's help, but she still felt lost and alone. Would she ever be able to find happiness again? Or was she doomed to a life of sadness and struggle? One day, as Emily was walking back to her new apartment after a long shift at the diner, a group of men started catcalling her from across the street. Emily tried to ignore them and keep walking, but the men continued to shout lewd comments and taunts in her direction. Emily felt a surge of fear and anger rising in her chest. She had experienced this kind of harassment before, but it never got any easier to deal with. She quickened her pace, hoping to put some distance between herself and the men. But just as she was about to turn the corner, one of the men ran up behind her and grabbed her arm. Emily yelped in alarm, trying to pull away from his grip. "Where do you think you're going, sweetheart?" the man sneered. "We just want to talk to you." Emily felt a wave of panic wash over her. She knew she was in a dangerous situation and didn't know how to get out of it. But just as she thought things couldn't get any worse, a car pulled up beside them. It was Mary, her kind customer from the diner. "Emily, get in the car!" Mary shouted, waving her hand frantically. Emily didn't hesitate. She wrenched her arm free from the man's grip and ran to the car, throwing open the door and sliding into the passenger seat. Mary hit the gas, peeling out of the parking spot and leaving the men behind. As they drove away, Emily felt a mix of emotions flooding through her. She was grateful to Mary for rescuing her, but she was also angry and frustrated that she had to deal with this kind of harassment in the first place. When they got to Emily's apartment, Mary hugged her tightly and promised to check in on her regularly to make sure she was safe. Emily felt a glimmer of hope in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, things were starting to turn around for her. Thanks to Mary's continued support, Emily began to feel like life was worth living again. Mary introduced Emily to her friends, who welcomed her with open arms and helped her find a better job at a local cafe. Emily worked hard and saved up enough money to go back to school, pursuing her dream of becoming a nurse. Through it all, Mary was there for her every step of the way. She was more than just a customer or a friend. She was a guardian angel who had saved Emily from the depths of despair and given her a second chance at life. Years passed, and Emily never forgot the kindness that Mary had shown her. When Emily graduated from nursing school, she invited Mary to the ceremony, tears streaming down her face as she hugged her tight. "Thank you," Emily whispered. "Thank you for believing in me and never giving up on me." Mary smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "I always knew you had it in you," she said. "You're a fighter, Emily. Never forget that." As Emily walked across the stage to receive her diploma, she felt a sense of peace and contentment wash over her. She had come so far from the scared and lonely waitress she had once been, and she knew that she had Mary, her guardian angel, to thank for it all. If you like this story, subscribe now and don't forget to check out our other videos.